Welcome to the LDA Podcast, a series by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. Our podcast is dedicated to exploring topics of interest to educators, individuals with learning disabilities, parents, and professionals to work towards our goal of creating a more equitable world. Hi everyone, welcome to the LDA Podcast. We're here today to talk about the new Zero Barriers in STEM Education Guide, which is an exciting new project developed by the Smithsonian Science Education Center. So here to talk about the guide is Khadijah Thibodeaux, the Senior Science Curriculum Developer at the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and Jen Reichwage, a Pensacola-based science educator who field tested the guide in her classroom. So I want to welcome you both to the podcast and give you a chance to introduce yourselves. Khadijah, could you start us off?
Hi, of course. So yes, my name is Khadijah Thibodeaux, and like you mentioned, I'm a senior science curriculum developer at the Smithsonian Science Education Center. And our center is one of many Smithsonian units, but what's unique about us is we are the only unit focused primarily on formal K through 12 education. And within the center, I work on this really cool project called Smithsonian Science for Global Goals. And we've created a series of community research guides that help youth ages 11 to 18 grapple with complex global topics that are a part of a sustainable future.
That's fantastic. And Jen, I'll give you a chance now.
All right, thanks for having us. Like you said, my
course.
name is Jen Reichwage. I'm a 7th and 8th grade science teacher at Creative Learning Academy here in Pensacola, Florida. And I'm also a niche ambassador for the Smithsonian Science Education Center. They have started this group called NEST, and it is a group of science researchers, educators, students, and we are helping transform STEM education in a really unique way, looking at sustainability. And so when this guide came about, accessibility plays a big role in a sustainable future. And so that's where the two kind of tie together so well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I wanted to talk about the process of creating the Zero Barriers Guide. What was that like? I noticed when I was going through that there was a lot of focus on social emotional learning, on nurturing open-mindedness, on these little check-ins to see how you're feeling. How does this resonate with what you already know? So if you could walk us through that, Khadijah, I would be really interested to know more what that process was like. What were the sort of things you had in mind when you were designing this?
Yeah, so the Zero Barriers Guide is actually a part of a larger series of 13 guides. And in each of these guides, we take this participatory action research approach to education where we say, okay, there's this topic we hope you learn and grapple with, but we're not going to tell you absolutely what's important about that topic. We're going to give you the tools you need to really investigate it for yourself, determine what's important, and then take actions to better your community based on what you've learned. So for each of our guides within this series, it is incredibly important to us that we're taking kind of the most current scientific understanding of a topic, along with what that topic means to communities, and pull that together into a guide. With Zero Barriers, the topic of access and accessibility is just so close to communities that we were like, okay, this is a great opportunity to kind of evolve the framework that we already have and see what's the most we can get out of it. So I've spent nearly 2 years interviewing experts and talking to a variety of experts, whether it is an expert on healthcare access or someone who's engineered assistive technology or an assistive technology user or experts that represent both communities with disabilities and other areas of expertise. Once we've gotten all of this great information from really what we would see as people at the forefront of this field, or at the forefront of this topic, we then start to conceptualize, okay, how can we take the essence of what we've learned through our research, whether Smithsonian science or external expertise, and translate it into an experience for youth? So we start to think of what youth will discover, how they will investigate some of the more social aspects of their community, what investigations will help them understand, so how they'll really become data collectors and interpreters, and then finally, what potential actions they can take. And then we take that and we give it to kind of the next part of the puzzle, which are very important teachers like Jen, who try it out in their classrooms and say, okay, this really worked and this was pivotal. Or what if it included a little more of this? Or when the students did that, we actually had a really robust conversation in that direction. Could it be folded in? From there, we take the feedback from teachers. We send the guide back out to technical reviewing experts. So these are, again, sometimes the experts we spoke to originally, sometimes the new experts. But for this guide, very importantly, both individuals with and without disabilities. And they give us really their expertise in terms of the nitty-gritty science we've incorporated into the guide. We bring that all together and really try to find a way to highlight every perspective while maintaining like a really thorough but clear experience, and then publish a guide. So the guide becomes this huge culmination of, I would say, over 60 or 70 perspectives on this topic from stakeholders globally, and then teachers in their classrooms as well, all brought together into one little package that we send out into the world.
I love that. And I definitely want to talk more about the people that you interviewed. If you could speak on the importance of having individuals with disabilities contribute to this guide, be interviewed in this guide. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the role of research mentors in the guide, and how that is something that I found really unique.
Yes. So there's a very vital saying that comes out of the disability advocacy community that is nothing about us without us. And we believe, and still to this day believe, that there's no great way to create anything on access and accessibility without the thoughts, perspective, and guidance of those who are really addressing the barriers most often or engaging with barriers to access most often. So I think our first step in terms of really ensuring that individuals with disabilities were at the foundation of the guide was that, how do we create a guide that really meets the needs that are out there? But beyond that, we also wanted to make sure that in the guide, when students read it and see it, students with disabilities feel themselves reflected in it. So, like I mentioned, Smithsonian Science for Global Goals is a series. And in all of our guides, there are these research mentors that students hear quotes from, and they really learn that scientists have personalities, right? Scientists love football, and scientists have friends, and scientists create art. So, and what we've seen is students really are like, once they see that complexity of scientists, it makes scientists seem a little more like close to home, a little more relevant, and it makes the field of science seem a little more accessible. So when we went to create this guide, it was very important that the scientists, the experts, the social scientists that students were engaging with also reflected communities with disabilities, so that students, both with and without disabilities, one, recognize that there is a deep amount of expertise within this community, but so that students with disabilities can see themselves in science and in the future of science.
Like to add to that, I think something unique about the experts is that they became very vulnerable in this process. And so one of the experts, John Lawson, was a double amputee and ended up becoming a pilot and a PADI certified scuba diver. And I remember my students' reaction. They were like, I want to do both of those things. Like, those are bucket list items for me as I'm a developing student. And to see this inspirational character, one, willing to come and talk to us about his science knowledge, but then also share like, hey, I can do really hard things everybody said I wouldn't be able to, and look what I've been able to do. It was it was really impactful to have those conversations within the classroom where maybe we don't often enough say, even though the odds may be stacked against you, look at what you can do. And so I think the experts, especially for this guide, were phenomenal and played a huge role in that, really talking about accessibility in a safe place, in a vulnerable way.
I think that Jen brought up a really great point. And I would say another thing that we tried to make sure we highlighted with our experts, both individuals with and without disabilities, is the variety of topics under this umbrella of access.
Yeah.
So when we knew when we were creating the guide that when you ask someone about access, there are several vital things that someone might say. And we wanted to ensure that all of the major topics we knew communities were grappling with were represented in the guide itself. So we have experts that represent transportation, education, healthcare, and then systems we don't often think of as systems. So, like jobs and careers or recreation. But then we also have experts that really are highlighting different accessibility skills. So, experts in related to accessible design or assistive technology or workplace accommodations in accessible workplaces, experts who really focus on neurodiversity and neuro inclusion. And our idea is when you put all of that expertise together, then you kind of get this guide and experience on access. It has to be multifaceted and it has to kind of reach into various aspects of a community in the world.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, Jennifer, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it was like implementing the guide in your classroom. You had the sort of trial run.
I
You said you
did.
teach seventh to eighth graders.
Yes,
So
I do.
I'm excited to know, like, what was their initial reaction when you introduced the guide?
They were really, so I said, we're going to do this, field testing for the Smithsonian. It's such a big deal. And I said, and it's about accessibility. And everybody just kind of was shocked. They're like, we're not even sure what that means. And so the guide does a really good job of helping educators develop this vocabulary, this robust vocabulary about accessibility. And students, as they became more familiar with using the terminology and really understanding, like, what does barrier mean? Are we talking about a physical, a communication, an attitude? Like, there's a lot of barriers that we could be talking about. And so it was really fascinating to watch them kind of change their perspectives. And a lot of them, we would start and they would be like, websites don't need to be accessible. Everybody uses a website. And then we really did some research and figured out websites can be huge barriers. They can turn people away from economy because they don't have access to it. So as it developed and as we shared this language of accessibility, they really became more open and understood like how our system really has these barriers that we need to determine how we're going to move forward and remove for everybody to have a seat at the table. It was really an exciting experience.
That's so awesome to hear. It's almost like sometimes once that's unlocked, you're able to see barriers everywhere. The minute you realize something that you thought was always accessible is actually not accessible, it's suddenly a lot easier to see that in day-to-day life and to expand from there. So I totally see what you're saying that, at first they weren't so sure. They didn't see any barriers. And then this
Right.
program, especially again, I just want to go back to the human element of it as well. Like it's one thing to discuss disabilities in abstract term, but again, these resource mentors and the people who are coming in for interviews and the people included in the guide really do make this very 3D and very true to life.
It's interesting. You said it makes it accessible, like you're able to talk about it within your day to day. And so
Yeah.
something that came up that I was telling Khadijah about, they started talking about our school's pep rallies. And so we would have kids that just loved them. That was their time to shine. They loved to go and get excited and rambunctious. And then, we had students that said, that is the worst day. I would love to stay home when there's a pep rally. It's too much noise. I feel overwhelmed. My body shuts down. And so this guide allowed me to sit at a table with students and have this really powerful conversation about pep rallies. And so by the end of it, students were like, yeah, I do notice now that there are students with their ears covered. And I do notice that people aren't comfortable. So what can we do? And so they decided that the best thing would be to have a basket of headphones of noise canceling. And just you could take it if you needed it, but that would be a good solution to help make that time more accessible to everyone. And so even in their own little system, they were able to kind of innovate and figure out ways to make everybody feel better. And it was just great. It was so amazing that everybody felt safe enough to talk about that. And then people were willing to kind of come up with ideas to improve our system.
Yeah, I would say even to build off of what Jen just said, because what she shared to me is so powerful. And when she
Yeah.
shared it, I'm like, that's the goal, that's the intent, really just
Right.
thinking about the world around us. We also wanted to take this as an opportunity for students to realize that accessibility can benefit everyone and not just what they would think about in terms of individuals with disabilities. So in the section on education, they start to learn about learner variability and how we're all unique and everyone has different strengths and preferences and needs. And it takes these ideas of UDL and it no longer makes UDL just about servicing our students with learning disabilities versus servicing our students with a mobility restriction or servicing this type of students. It really starts to become, how can we create classrooms that everyone comes into and feels welcome and seen and as if they have the ability to participate? And it really removes this idea of students needing to disclose a part of their identity if they're not comfortable yet. It is saying, no, we are creating an experience and a space for all of us. And then we've also seen the opposite of students who've been looking for an opportunity to share this part of their life and their lived experiences with their colleagues or with their peers. They're given that space. So to be able to say in the middle of a UDL conversation, actually, I am a student with dyslexia and this has been my experience, and your classmates being able to really utilize that experience in thinking about how they're going to better the classroom.
Absolutely. And providing that language for them too, to have that conversation. The more self-knowledge that you can have, the better, and the more empowered you're able to be. And again, a lot of these things, like you said, Khadijah, are benefiting everybody. Jen, is there any other moments that really stood out to you during implementing this? I want to talk about 7th and 8th graders as well, just being aware that they can make change, even though they are so young still. Maybe if you want to talk a little bit more about the process, what it was like in the classroom, and then we can get to what it was like, what their reactions at the end were.
I think, honestly, this age range that we're talking about, especially for me, middle school, is the perfect age to start talking about this because they're still developing that social awareness. And if we are able to provide them language and tools at this age, it really shapes who they become as they grow up. And so I feel like this is the best age to kind of really start these intense dialogues about, is our system working? Does everybody have a place? Does it move forward together? So I'm glad to be a part of it at this age range for my kids because I really think they benefit. We were talking about website accessibility and it was profound. They really were like, no, we don't need to discuss this. So we found the University of Washington has a sample website that is really difficult to navigate. And so I put it out as an assignment and I said, hey guys, try it, like figure this out. And they were so frustrated. And so then they started thinking, yeah, this is tough. And so through Zero Barriers, we're like talking about, what if this was your day to day? Would you still order pizza? Would you still want to read the book that I assigned? And it just started clicking. And they started thinking about what else maybe is a barrier that we don't see. And so it was so magical to kind of walk through this with them. And then we got, at the end of the Zero Barriers, you do oral histories. And so we really looked at how do we tell stories about ourselves? And they were able to use some of the vocabulary and draw on that and include that in their stories. So, like Khadijah said, those that were ready to share that maybe hadn't been before, or even about family members or growing up, were able to share these really moving stories and feel ownership and then show, strength from this growth that they had gotten through all these conversations that we'd been having. So just really exciting to do that with students who sometimes get dismissed as being socially not there yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I was going to say, I think it highlights one of my favorite parts of the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals project. So all of our guides are developed for youth ages 11 to 18. And as you can tell, what an 11-year-old thinks of and what an 18-year-old thinks of, incredibly different, yet so similar. So we would get this amazing work from Jen's students in this middle school classroom, and then also get work from pre-service teachers in their first year of undergraduate education using this guide as a part of their freshman coursework. And it is so interesting to see a middle school student and an undergraduate student come up with the same solution to two different problems on separate sides of the country, or to see students that are in completely different contexts globally start to come up with similar ideas, or see the differences in ideas and how they are really finding what is uniquely fit to their place. But we like to say that we design with the assumption that you come to us with only the knowledge you have of experiencing the world around you. And we want this experience to feel like it is good, challenging, and robust for that student, all the way up to the like 18-year-old who's like, I've actually already run my own podcast for years. I know all of the things in the world. And we get a couple of those, especially through our youth ambassadors, and they can still say, oh, wow, I was able to use this, and I already had this larger meeting at my school, and this provided me these tools that I could bring into that meeting. So everyone's kind of finding the way that the work works in the context they already exist in, but it's nice to see it exist in so many places and in so many ways.
I agree. And I think part of this science, I mean, I'm by nature a science teacher, right? And so I think accessibility plays such a huge role in science. And anytime we design anything, we use the engineering design process and we think about, like, socially, how does this fit? Are we being good stewards of our environment? Is it economically sound? Like all those things that you think of when you design something. And now we tied in this third or fourth role, which was, does this work for everybody? Is this design truly beneficial to everybody? And if not, we need to consider that too. So it was really great to kind of add that perspective to all of these designs that we have been making over time. Now we say, okay, but if it only works for this small majority of people, is this really a sustainable design?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Jen, I wanted to ask as well, just from your perspective as a teacher, how easy was the guide to implement in your classroom?
So the guides, all of the guides that Smithsonian puts out are like puzzle pieces. So if you are an English language teacher and you're looking to talk about accessibility because you're reading Of Mice and Men, you could look at it and just take that piece and kind of fit it into your framework, which I love. As a science teacher, we did it to fidelity. So I went start to finish, and it was spectacular. I felt like we got everything the guide had to offer. But now moving forward, I can see where I will take pieces and fit them into different parts of my own curriculum, because I think that they go so well together. I also have the advantage, I work on the advisory curriculum for my school. So that social emotional learning, we've used it a lot in there. And the response from the teachers is profound. They say they feel more connected to their students. They feel like they understand their students' perspectives better. And so each year we start Smithsonian style with an identity map. So your name's in the middle and you kind of share pieces of your identity that you feel good about sharing. And just that simple act of, oh, I didn't know you liked the beach. Like, I didn't know that you grew up fishing. Like, that's all these little things that connect us is so powerful. And I feel like this guide brings more and more of those out and allows us to kind of join together in this learning experience.
Well, you guys both did a great job already of covering what you hope students will take away from the Zero Barriers Guide. It sounds like there's been a lot of great takeaways already. But is there anything, I wanted to give you a chance just in case there was something that we didn't get a chance to talk about.
I think the main thing that, if I'm speaking directly to the teachers, is to look at the story map. Smithsonian Science Education Center does this great job of taking that huge guide and putting it into a really teacher-friendly story map. Go through it and see what jumps out to you, because there's going to be parts of this guide that are going to really interact with what you're trying to do in the classroom and give you all these resources that will help enhance the conversations that you're having in class. And I think that knowing that this resource is there will just really benefit that social emotional component of your teaching.
I think one thing for me is, well, one question we've gotten about the guide a lot throughout its development and now that we're into its dissemination is, who is this guide for? Right? Who should be using the Zero Barriers Guide? And I think one of our biggest things we hope everyone takes away is that this is a guide that has been made for, to whatever extent possible, for everyone. So the guide is written to be student facing, which means student groups can interact with it themselves. If there's students 11 to 18 who really want to host a student club or they're working on their own independent project, it's a resource in that way. As Jen has mentioned, it is adapted within formal classrooms. So teachers are bringing it within their topic. So maybe a computer science teacher wants to use our section on computational thinking, right? So it's showing the robust connections to every aspect of what we've learned. But there's also opportunities for parents and community groups, really anyone interested in working with students to better their community or make their community more accessible. We're hoping this is the resource for them. And it has been designed with all of these groups in mind. I always say that it's so interesting that we put this guide out into the world, and you would think guide is like, okay, this is exactly what I have to do one to one to one. But it really is a framework that takes you through a potential experience. And as Jen is mentioning, it's very modular by design. So I always encourage people to just start with what looks fun to you and what you think is relevant to your community and pull that out and start to see how the activities kind of feel. And then from there, creating your own roadmap. So maybe you're like a superstar like Jen that wants to go top to bottom, or maybe you're really focused on these kind of community access pieces. So the larger systems like healthcare, education, maybe you're really focused on the accessibility skills and the accessibility, but there's no pressure for anyone's implementation to look like another person's. It's really just this opportunity to find the things that resonate with you, your community, and the people around you. And to know that even if the only action you took was discussing the prompt in the guide, you've created positive change. And if you've gone as far as to engineer assistive technology and distribute it throughout your community, that's a great impact as well. But we're really just hoping that people begin to engage with the materials and recognize that we all have agency and we can all be a part of the co-creation of whatever the future will be. And we're hoping that this gives everyone tools to make accessibility a key part of that future.
And I think it's important to note that it's free. All of
Yes.
these resources are free. And so, as an educator, it's difficult sometimes to find really high quality curriculum. And so this resource from Smithsonian Science Education Center is amazing because they've done so much work to make sure it's nothing but the highest quality. And so to have that at your fingertips for free is such an incredible resource for educators.
So, Khadijah, could you tell us about how people can access these guides and what's coming up next?
Yes, so the guides are freely available online at the Smithsonian Science Education Center website. It can specifically be found, the Zero Barriers Guide, at ssec.si.edu/zero-barriers-guide, or through our webpage. And what's coming next is very exciting. So our center will be hosting a 2-week virtual academy for educators where they're able to come online and learn a little bit about the content within the guide. They'll learn a little bit about the pedagogy that underlies our educational approach, and then also really be able to ideate and think about ways of bringing this guide into their classroom. So you're also able to register for that academy on our website, and we're excited in mid-March to bring the guide out to communities.
Well, Khadijah and Jen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This was such a great talk, and I am so excited about the Zero Barriers Guide.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so
course.
much.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast. To learn more about LDA and to get valuable resources and support, visit ldaamerica.org.